Welcome to CV Check. I'm Jessica Zoiti, and today we're discussing how to have a conversation with someone transitioning at work. The process of transitioning and sharing this desire with the wider community is one of the most daunting things a trans person will ever do. The fear of rejection and humiliation can be all-consuming. How HR and line managers handle this conversation is crucial, yet many are not prepared. Joining me from Portsmouth to talk us through this topic and provide helpful tips to creating a more inclusive workplace is Joanne Lockwood, founder and CEO of See Change Happen. Hi, Joanne. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, absolute pleasure. It's great to join you from the UK on this fairly dull and grey morning, but yeah, it's really great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. Appreciate the early start. And tell me, how are you remaining safe and well amidst this COVID-19 crisis?
Well, I've been effectively self-isolating or social distancing at home for, since early March. Most of my work is normally around speaking, training, being in front of people. And as you're probably aware, most organisations have shut down their conferences and they're not really in the office themselves. So there's not really a lot for me to do. So I've moved online. I've moved onto the remote world. So I'm working from home, which I've done extensively for the last couple of years. The difference for me is my wife has been furloughed, so she's been sat at home. So it's very unusual to have two of us around for like 6 to 8 weeks. I think she's been home now for 6 weeks. So it's really unusual to have somebody else at home while I'm working. It's taken some adjustment, but yeah, we're getting on well.
Oh, well, that's good. That's handy. And so, getting back to the topic, you are openly transgender. What personal,
Yes.
professional, and physical challenges have you experienced during your transition journey?
It's interesting that when you did the introduction about this fear of humiliation, fear of rejection, the imposter syndrome, the feeling of not being good enough. Those are the kind of things that went through my mind, and I when I speak to other friends, there's a similar sort of experiences. It's like the biggest, darkest secret you've ever had, and being open, telling somebody, it's one of those things you can't go back on. And because there's such a social stigma around it, you really are apprehensive about that rejection, or about being laughed at, or humiliated, or even discriminated against. Because I know many people who have been discriminated against because they're openly trans. So I found it quite a struggle with my family, telling them. That was a very traumatic time for all of us, especially my children and my wife, the people who are closest to me. And I'm sure my parents went through an equally traumatic time, although they've been fantastic with it. But at that time, my mental health was quite poor. I couldn't sleep. Things were racing in my head. I quite confess I was very unproductive because I co-owned an IT company, director, with 2 business partners and operations director. And I wasn't very productive. I wasn't a fantastic member of the team at that point. And I know my performance was way off what it should have been. And I couldn't face telling my colleagues, my co-directors, my customers, my suppliers, I couldn't face that coming out, being open to my world, my professional world. It was just too much for me to handle. So what I ended up doing was I allowed them to buy me out. They made an offer to buy me out. I think they detected that something wasn't right in my life. They had different ideas where the business wants to go. And I decided that was a great time to move on. So I sold up. So effectively, I bottled it. I didn't transition at work as such. I transitioned the day I signed the sale agreement and they purchased my shares. So that was February 2017. So just over 3 years ago. And embarked on this new career of promoting trans awareness, inclusion and belonging to companies and organisations throughout the UK, Europe and elsewhere now. And to be honest, I found my life being very, very successful. I see trans as being kind of my superpower rather than something that works against me. But I know that I have privilege. I don't have that same lived experience as other people. So I do recognise that I've been very lucky in that journey and that transitional process. But yeah, that's kind of how I got here today. I think I bumped into you at RecFest Australia or your colleagues when I was over in Melbourne last fall. So yeah, this is quite a journey really.
So you touched on mental health briefly in your journey. Right now, and we're not going to focus on COVID-19 too much, but because it's topical, obviously the global pandemic has forced all of us into isolated workspaces almost overnight. So beyond the ordinary challenges this situation presents, does it pose any additional challenges for trans people?
Almost certainly. I think trans people at this time will feel the sense of isolation. For many trans people who aren't open or out with their family, they're going to struggle because maybe they're locked down. They're living at home 24/7 with family members. Maybe they normally used to get respite by going out, going to work, or socialising in the evenings and weekends with their friends. So now, for a trans person who's not out and open to their family, they're going to be really struggling. They're not going to be able to express themselves. They're not going to be able to get the same sort of support. And yes, they can chat online. Yes, they can contact people through Facebook and other groups, but it's not the same sometimes as being able to just get out and be you and be supported as you. And I also know many trans people who, for their own pressures of home life, haven't transitioned in their social life, but they have transitioned at work. So again, this is an example where they may have to work as their trans identity on camera or however they perform remotely, but in an environment that's kind of hostile to that identity, and that can be a real struggle. So I'd say mental health is quite critical for many trans people, even outside of lockdown. I also know that many trans people are struggling to get medication, hormones. Many trans people have had things like if they've elected for surgery, they've had the surgical assessments, surgical appointments cancelled or postponed. They can't get access to their GPs. So the whole process of their transition is kind of on hold or in limbo. And it also comes down to privilege, because I know in the UK, many doctors and the gender clinics are doing interviews via Zoom now or online video. Yeah. And not everybody has the access to computers, internet, phones in order to be able to carry this out. So it's becoming a kind of a two-tier. If you are privileged and have access to internet cameras and Zoom, then you can access it. If you don't, then you can't. So it's affecting people differently, but certainly it is having an impact.
Okay, so you've said that the way that very first conversation is handled with someone transitioning in the workplace is crucial. Why is that?
Well, I've been practicing in my head this conversation for years, well, certainly months and weeks, and I've probably been telling my friends on Facebook that today I'm going to tell my boss, or today I'm going to be open, and I've got all this bow wave of pressure behind me, and everyone going, "Go Joe, go Joe! You know, today's the day. Good luck, good luck, good luck." So there I am, catching the train and sitting there. This is all that's on my mind. What they're going to say to me? Are they going to reject me? What's going to happen? What's my boss going to say? I really don't know. So you've got all this sort of pressure, anxiety about this result. And you think about, if you go and ask for a pay rise sometimes, or you're having your appraisal, you've got all this anxiety about how you're going to be judged, whether you're going to be positively accepted. So you knock on the door, can I have a moment? And you sit down and say, I'm trans. And so that first reaction you're going to get, if it's not positive, immediately I'm going to start feeling that sense of rejection, oh my God, what have I done? This is going to go badly. And if the person sort of ums and ahs and looks like they're uncomfortable with this sort of statement, then that's going to reinforce the negative feelings I've got, and the more I'm going to feel that this may have been the worst decision of my life. So yeah. I try and encourage people to have these practices, have a role play. It should be no different to someone sitting in front of you saying, I'm pregnant. The response should be, wow, that's fantastic. It's amazing. Thank you for trusting me with that. Take a seat. Let's talk about that. What do you want to do? How's that going to work? How can we help? Type just reactions rather than panic. Oh my God, grab the phone, HR, help. We've got a trans person here. I don't know what to do. We need to have this as a kind of a natural conversation, so that I don't see the body language or that nervousness or the eyes or the panic in someone's eyes. So this seems to be a very affirming moment in someone's life. Otherwise, this is going to create some trauma.
Do you think that as time goes on, it's going to become a more expected conversation? Do you think it's the unexpected?
I think just by the very fact that trans people are more society almost grants them more permission, and I hate that word, more permission to be open. Trans people are more accepted. There's more awareness about trans people. Therefore, the more awareness, the more likely people are to say, well, actually, I can do this as well. I've got role models. I've got visibility. I know people. I've got friends who've transitioned at work and had a very positive experience. So I think for sure, trans people are going to feel more confident that they should be accepted and that route. So therefore, more people are going to want to embark on these conversations. And we also will end up with more people who identify as non-binary. Many of the younger generation are identifying as non-binary rather than binary trans. They're rejecting the whole concept of the gender boxes, the gender expectations around men and women. So how do organisations embrace those people as well? So we've got binary trans people, non-binary trans people,
Sure.
and we've also got maybe people who are gender fluid. Lots of different identities in the mix there. And there is no one size fits all. And I think that's the challenge organisations have, is to go away from this HR policy where one size fits all and becoming much more person-centric. HR policies generally aren't person-centric. They're blanket, they're rules for everybody rather than often treating people as individuals. And I think that's going to become part of the challenge.
Okay, so going back to that initial conversation, how should it be handled? And on top of that, what are the steps that employers should potential employees transition?
I always suggest that the first step should be to think about it now. And if you haven't thought about it now, get right onto it. So whether you think you have a trans person working for you or not, it shouldn't be a knee-jerk reaction to someone saying I'm trans. The policy should be in place. Because if I don't see the policies in place, I'm not going to want to have that conversation. So you can make me feel more relaxed, more comfortable, less anxious by me knowing this policy has a great trans inclusion policy at the workplace. So I know that I should get a great experience. So that's the first thing. So start off with making sure that there is process, policy and guidance for first line managers, for senior managers, HR, and also for colleagues, so that colleagues have an understanding as well. And that's embedded into L&D, embedded into the culture. So that's what you should be doing, regardless of whether you've got any trans people working for you. Make yourself a trans positive organisation. Maybe invest in some mental health first aid training, where you have people in the organisation who can support people who are maybe anxious, having anxieties, having poor mental health. Again, trans people, just through the very nature of the trauma they're going through, could have poor mental health. So if you're investing the time into your first line managers, into your HR teams, you've got good processes, then when I sit down in front of you, I would have a high expectation of a really positive reaction. Yeah, the answer would be, as I say, thank you for trusting me with that. Oh, that's great. That must be really difficult for you. That really affirming stuff. And okay, how can we help? What can we do? This is it's your journey. So no mapped out plan. I don't want to see people saying, well, okay, when are you having surgery? When are you changing your name? You need to talk to us. We need to have this conversation. It's like it should be allowing me to have my own roadmap, my own pathway. It may be I don't want to do anything about it. It may be I just want to have this conversation and tell you. It may be that I've got aspirations of making a change in the next year. So it's not a beginning and end journey. There is no sort of get on the conveyor belt and then get off again. This is a constant thing. But I also need to think about how my colleagues are going to treat me, because maybe some of my colleagues have known me for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. So they're suddenly going to see this old person die. This person they've known and respected for years and years and years is no longer there. This body snatcher's taken over. New names, new way of talking, maybe their interests. We don't talk about football anymore. We don't talk about Love Island. We don't talk about all these things anymore. We talk about different conversations, and that can be a real strain amongst colleagues and certainly in the family as well.
And what about pronouns? So someone's used to saying he, and all of a sudden they have to shift to possibly she. Is, in your experience, a difficult thing for people to recognize?
It is, yeah. It's the human brain. It builds these memories, builds these heuristics and characteristics, and people will latch on to someone they used to know. And there's very subliminal things like body shape, movement, gestures, intonations, all these kind of things, and the way you speak, they trigger this very deep down reaction as to how you see somebody. And many people, when they're working with a trans person they've known for a while, it takes a real set of experience and time to rewire the brain to think of you in a different way. So it's allowing colleagues to recognise the fact that this is going to be initially, I hate the word struggle, but it's going to be a thing they're going to have to get over. They're going to get it wrong. The trans person and the colleagues will work together and say, look, I really want you to support me. I really would love you if you embrace me. And I'm now Joe, she, her. And the colleagues go, oh, that's fantastic. And I used to say, I know you're going to get it wrong from time to time, and that's okay. You're allowed to get it wrong. Don't beat yourself up. But if we could work on it together so we get it right, so we're making progress. And if you do make a mistake, just correct yourself and move on. I won't make a big deal of it. So I think in some cases it's a bit of a partnership. It's a working relationship. You want to have those sort of conversations with colleagues, with friends, with staff, in an open way. I don't want to be toxic or difficult or awkward to deal with, but I also, in return, I want your respect and your consideration as well. So I think if we work hand in hand with this, it can be positive for both of us.
There's a two-way street.
Hmm.
And so if an employer's reaction is poor, can there be some negative impact on the business?
You broke up there. I think you said, what impact could this have on the business if the reaction's poor?
Yes, if there's a negative reaction from the company's perspective, it can have a negative impact on the business.
Yeah, I often say that a company and the culture is judged by how you treat the most vulnerable or the weakest or the most marginalised people in society. So whilst somebody else in the organisation may not be trans, may not have any trans friends, they see how I've been treated, how I've been pushed out, marginalised, talked about behind my back. And then this culture becomes one of undermining people, jokes, inappropriate conversations go on. And that becomes the culture, that becomes pervasive within the organisation. And people start to get the feeling that this is actually not a great place to work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing to think of is when an employee is disgruntled, disengaged, they become more careless, less attentive, less motivated. They're at a greater risk of espionage, stealing ideas, looking for other jobs. If you look at cybersecurity, a disgruntled employee is far more likely to be more compromised in cybersecurity. They're less observant, maybe in their emails, their links they click. They may even try and steal data or hack something because they're feeling bored or disengaged. Well, if you treat me like this, I'll return the favour by treating you like this. So again, an employee that's disengaged, being discriminated against, is likely to be disruptive in the organisation, and it's also likely the organisation will see how you've treated them. So I think by embracing somebody, allowing them to thrive, recognising they're still the same capability you hired them for, why wouldn't you? What happens is they look different. We cope when people maybe had a serious accident. We cope when people get married, they change their name. We cope with people who do lots of different things. So why can't we cope when a trans person wants to embark on a change in their life? It's just the same person, different skin, if you like, different view. Just a rebrand.
Okay, so before we say goodbye today, how can your organisation see change happen, help workplaces become more inclusive? What services do you offer that people should consider taking up to be more welcoming of trans people, among other people who are marginalised?
I work at several levels. So I would say a lunch and learn awareness session. So I often do Zoom calls, coffee with Joe, a lunch with Joe type stuff where I do Q&A with teams. So this is something a company could put on, invite me into the room, into the Zoom room or physically to have this conversation, ask me anything type stuff as a subject matter expert. I also can work with HR teams, D&I teams to help look at policy, make sure the language is not othering, it's inclusive from a trans perspective and trans lens. I can also do mentoring one-to-one with maybe line managers and HR teams to have that first conversation, and also senior leadership team. brief the team on building an inclusive culture, not just for trans people, but for all people. So a combination of that, and if you're having a conference or you want to do a podcast, you want to put something on your website, maybe you want to show you're trans positive by putting trans positive conversation on your website. You can do we can co-author a blog, co-author some training material or anything like that. So really open to engage, to give you the opportunity to be a trans positive workplace.
Great. Okay, well, Joanne, thank you so much for giving us your time today. And if anyone out there would, thank you. And if anyone out there would like more information on the work Joanne does at See Change Happen, you can visit seechangehappen, changehappen.co.uk. So thank you so much for tuning in. And here at CV Check, we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.